All right. Last thing I want to talk about from Sunday that Ed mentioned was, and this is something that I didn't know. Man, I went to Bible college, and they didn't teach me this. That phrase when in John 3:16, when it says, God so loved the world, He gave His only Son, that whoever would believe in Him. And then that phrase, which again, I didn't know this until later. I even took Greek, and it didn't hit me until later. The first time that those two words, believe in, were put together in the Greek language. And up until that point, the phrase was just believe. And it was more on the lines of, hey, if you just believe that, something happened.
Right.
Or you believe in this thought, that's when, but Jesus, or if John just added that parenthetically, which there's a debate on that. But whoever wrote that verse was intentionally trying to get us to know something, that it's not just a belief that something happened. It is a belief in.
Yes.
And it's that trust part that comes in. That really is, and I think I've seen some translations of John 3:16 say not necessarily believe, it's trusts.
Yes.
Because that's really what the phrase meant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
ultimately it's about putting your life's weight on something, that the decisions I make are really bound up in whether He is who He said He is. And I think that's a huge part of what we talk about when we talk about following God, is that, or following Jesus, in particular, is everything is really based on who He is. And it's not just His teachings, and His teachings are obviously so important, and they're revolutionary. There's never really been anything like this before. But really, His teachings are valuable because of Him and His life and His death and His resurrection. That this whole thing of Jesus proving, hey, I am who I said I am. I am the Son of God. I am, as John 3:16 says, God's Son that was sent here to give His life. That being confirmed in His resurrection gives the teaching all the weight that it needs, because it really is one of those things that when you see all of this together, and you choose, I'm going to put my life's weight on that, and the reason I'm going to love my enemies, and the reason that I'm going to be as generous as I need to be, and the reason that I'm going to not live for myself but live for others, is not because it just makes sense, because most of the time it's not going to make sense it's certainly not in the moment.
No.
And so if it's just, well, hey, this is the smart way of doing things, it's not going to feel smart in the moment. It is smart because it comes from the smartest man who ever lived.
That's right.
But the only reason that we know it's smart is because of who he is.
Who He is.
Right. And so if, a lot of us have to start at, well, I'm just going to do what Jesus said. But at some point that does lead to this point of, I'm going to do everything He said because of who He is.
I can't tell you how many times I've sat with people in my office, and they'll come in, and usually it's something along the lines of, this person has done me wrong,
Right.
and what am I going to do about this? And if I ever start to lean in to say, well, at some point forgiveness has to take place, and it's something, and it can be something really egregious, and people, how in the world could I do that? Why in the world would I do that? That's like waving a white flag. That's giving up. That's putting myself in a vulnerable position, and that doesn't make, ultimately what they're saying to me is, to forgive that person for what they've done, or to turn the other cheek and just, that doesn't make sense. And I just have to admit to them, okay, from where you sit right now, I get that. It doesn't make sense. And I see all your reasons, and you're right, that logically does not make sense. So why do it? Well, ultimately, I have to come back to that. It's, well, Jesus said that was the way to live, and I believe He's right about everything.
Right.
And so I'm going, I think it's Andy Stanley that I hear say this all the time. He says, if you can predict your own resurrection and pull it off, I'll go with whatever you say.
Yeah.
And once you've convinced that, and once you're convinced of that in your mind, then everything Jesus said is the way to go, whether or not it feels right in the moment.
Yes.
And I have to push past that, and that's the struggle of
That's the trust part.
That's the trust part, is I just go, I don't get it, I don't feel it, but you know what? You said it, I'm going that direction, and you're just gonna have to prove to me down the line, and then I continue, and that's a continuous trust, even when I make the call and I start to do things, that counterintuitive kind of thing, and I don't see the results right away. I've talked with a friend recently about, I'm headed a direction and I don't feel I don't feel like anything's changing. And I go, yeah, I get that. It's just gonna take a while. And in the meantime, you've got to continue to practice trust and believe that it's gonna eventually. And you know what? You might not get that feeling that you're looking for eventually, but you got to just continue to, if he's right and if he is who he said he is, then you're on the right path.
Well, and I think it's the part about, when we talk about this of, when you said feeling, I think that's so true. And you even said counterintuitive. I think that's true. I think often when you hear this, you go, see, that's why I can't do the whole Jesus thing, because it's just not logical. You've even said it doesn't feel logical in the moment. The problem is, it actually is logical. We often live off of intuition and feeling. And we don't even realize we're doing it. Because see, the logical thing is the thing you said, Andy said, that if there's a person who predicted their own resurrection and pulled it off and said, hey, the reason why is because I'm the Son of God and I know everything, then the only logical thing is to go, well,
that's right.
Well, then I'm just going to do what he says, but it doesn't feel logical in the moment because intuitively I feel like my perception of reality is the one that really works. It's like my oldest daughter loves to climb trees, and so she'll often get herself up into a tree so high she doesn't know how to come back down. And she'll get down, and sometimes the trees are ones where she'll have to have someone boost her up into it. So the only way to get down is to jump. And she's scared to jump. And so I'll stand underneath her and say, jump into my arms. And everyone who's ever had to do anything like this with a child knows they don't want to jump. They don't want to jump. And because in their mind, there is no logical way this is going to work. But I know, as the older, wiser parent, I know from where I'm standing, there's no way you're going to jump and I'm not going to catch you. I know I'm going to catch you. And that's the trust part that comes into it. And that really is Jesus' whole paradigm for everything, is that Jesus, he says at one point, I only do what I see the Father doing. And it's because, and I don't just think that's even flowery kind of metaphorical language. I think Jesus was interacting with the kingdom of God at every moment, and he sees God at work in everything. And so when he sees God at work, he goes, well, I'm just going to do whatever God does. And so Jesus perceived a kingdom where the only logical thing to do when someone wrongs you is to love and forgive them. It's the only logical thing to do, because God is a God who says, I reward that. And that's the way, because, he says at one point, if you want to get ahead, if you want to be first, you got to be last. And that already just seems completely false. But Jesus goes, in my kingdom, that's the only way that makes sense. That's the only way. Or to be generous, or the one that I talk about a lot to people is when you get to a point where you're super anxious about something. And I have friends tell me this all the time, and I know you're going to tell me. I know what you're going to say. And I know it's right. Trust in Jesus, trust in God. I was talking to a group on Sunday night, and I said, when that's what comes out, what you know is that's not actually what they believe then. Yeah. Because if there's a difference between knowing and trusting in something, what you ultimately trust is either I've got to figure it out, or a lot of us have a kind of superstition around worry that if I think about it, or I come at this from every angle, then somehow that's going to keep it from happening. That's what you trust in, because honestly, even just saying trust in God is not as, what I would say, offensive to someone dealing with anxiety as what Jesus would say, which is when Jesus said, hey, you're worried about something, go look at the birds.
That's right.
You come and you say, hey, I'm afraid my marriage is in trouble. I'm just worried about what's going to happen in the future. And then you come to Jesus and he goes, the birds always have food. And you'd be like, what are you talking about? The birds have food. But Jesus perceived a world where the only logical thing is you look at the beauty of creation. You look how there really is enough resources for everyone. The problem with our world is not overpopulation. The problem with our world as far as resources go is we are not allocating them correctly. That's right. Because we are not using them in the correct way. And Jesus perceives a world that says, God's provided everything, so why would you worry? Why would you freak out? Why would you worry about tomorrow? Because tomorrow's going to take care of itself. That's the trust in part. And that's the part that's hard. Most of us are pretty good. I would say most of us who follow Jesus or call ourselves Christians are good at the believe that part. Yes. I know about the Trinity, or I know that Jesus is the Son of God. If you gave me a test, I could check off all the correct answers. But when you come to my day-to-day, am I repenting, and I thought his example was great of turning my feet, that I'm just turning my feet away from this old way of life and I'm pointing them towards Jesus, Most of us aren't doing that part.
Yeah.
And that's where the anything is possible happens.
Well, it's when, like you said, I've heard the exact same thing. Somebody will present me with a dilemma or an issue, and they'll go, and I know what you're going to say, or I know what, Jesus says, or I know what's right, but,
Yes.
and I always going to go, well, whenever you say but, it's basically say, forget everything I just said. Here's what I really think. So that's the disconnect. I know what's right in my head, but I don't really feel like, or I can't, or I won't actually put it into practice. This is the distinction I think Jesus would make for us is you believe that something is true.
Yes.
But you have not yet believed in it. In other words, you haven't put, like to use that analogy, put your whole weight on it, like we've always done with the stool. Like we're both sitting on stools for those of you who are not watching, and we always talk about, I can point to the stool and say, yep, I believe that stool is there, and that doesn't prove anything about my trust level.
No.
I can even, like right now, I got one foot on the floor and half a butt cheek on the stool. I'm just one cheeking it. So I've not fully put my trust in the stool until I take both feet off the ground like this, and I sit like this. Now, because now if the thing goes down, I'm going down with it.
Yes.
So now I know my full weight, my full trust is in it. That's the life Jesus calls us to do. Put full weight on me. Put everything, everything in the Jesus basket, and just trust that He's got it. He knows what He's doing. He'll take care of it. Then you're going to start living that rebirth kind of life, and you'll live, according to the way Jesus called us to live in the kingdom. So.
Well, and that's the ultimate part of when you hear, or and it's in the Bible. You read it in the Bible where it said we walk by faith, not by sight. It's not this idea of blind faith in that just someone tells you believe in Jesus, so you believe in Jesus, and that's it. It may be that you investigate and you've got to figure out, but what you're investigating is whether Jesus Himself is who He claimed to be. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Or if you can really put the focus on that, because and we've talked about this really in this series. There's so much that really, when you talk about investigating Christianity, I'm investigating whether I want to be a Christian. And this is just, you can go on the internet and there are 1,000 rabbit holes you'll get lost down that won't ever point you towards Jesus. And if you can investigate whether this, going back to your stool analogy, investigate whether is this properly secured, that I can put my weight on. Investigate how much weight can this hold, but you're investigating the person. And then at that point, Jesus says, hey, you walk by faith and trusting me, because I get you can't see the kingdom the way you can't see how it's logical to jump from that tree into my arms. But if you go by faith and not what you can see, your perception of reality, then in that moment, then you're really walking by faith. And I think that's the important part, because I certainly don't want you to hear from what we're saying is just Christianity's blind faith and it's not logical and you got to turn your brain off. It's not at all. We're saying it's only logical once you come to the conclusion Jesus is who He said He is. He rose from the dead. He really is the Son of God. At that point, the only logical conclusion is He's worthy of putting my trust in.
Yep.